Good afternoon. Today we are going to discuss the impact of ICTs on politics, democracy, and society in the digital age. I will not go through all this heavy index. We are going to go through it step by step. And so we start with political issues in the digital world. You remember that in prehistory, they didn't know anything about states. No? Neither ICTs nor states were existing in the prehistoric. The state is typically a historical phenomenon, and history is synonymous of information. Now, so the thesis says the state is undergoing a slow, gradual process of political apoptosis. As one of your colleagues already explained us, very cold. By apoptosis, we intend the programmed death of cells. So every human body goes through, in a few years, a program set of deaths of our own cells, and in a few years we are new individuals. There is the philosophical issue, and if we are going to have time, we are going to address it. If a person whose the cells have completely changed has already the same identity. That's a pretty philosophical kind of problem. You can certainly say, of course, but it depends, of course. It depends on what you mean by conscience, and if it's totally unrelated by the physical reality. I leave it for the moment to the academic debate. In any case, we know what apoptosis means, and with this, so we describe when we say that the state is undergoing a slow, gradual process of political apoptosis, so the state, not the human body. What's the meaning of this metaphor? That with this we describe the gradual, natural process of renewal of sovereign states as they develop into information societies. The cells of the sovereign state, and we'll see what we mean by sovereign state, are mutating, and from the inside of the sovereign states, we have the beginning, the birth of new information societies that are taking over progressively, we call multi-agent systems, that they are going to take over more and more some of the functions of the original sovereign states. Just to explain the flow of the lecture of today. In the first part, this is an historical excursus in order to go through the history of the impact of ICTs on the sovereign state and then on the multi-agent systems that are taking over a wide part of functions from the traditional sovereign state, national state. In the second part, we are going to discuss on the opposite, an evolution of the discussion that we have already had about the nature of the interfaces that we've seen in terms of technological interfaces or natural or technological interfaces, and on the opposite, talking about the concept of human interfaces. So when the interface is not referred to an object of the nature or to an artifact, but is referred to a human being. That has heavy implications. So, moving on. Could we identify a birth date of such process? When do we start talking in a mature way about a sovereign state? in no, excuse me, when we start talking about this is at the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. When we start talking about the beginning of the apoptosis of the natural state, of the national state, is in Bretton Woods in 1944. Now, these are two capital dates for the history of humanity. And we see why. Peace of Westphalia, 1648, ended both the 30 years and the 80 years war. For those of you who are reading Dumas, the three musketeers were engaged in the siege of La Rochelle in 1628, just to give you a point of reference. And why did the Peace of Westphalia represent a major milestone of modern history? Because it represents the beginning, the birth of the national state, and the sovereign state coming to maturity. The new emerging system, the so-called Westphalian order, so the coming maturity of sovereign states first and then national states as we still know them today. What principles are national state based on? Any of you want to try? You didn't try, and it was a good choice, because everybody of you will say the power, the power, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial power. That's not the issue. We are not asking which are the three powers whose separation characterizes the national state. I'm asking which are the principles that are underpinning the sovereign state. And these are three. Sovereignty, the right to political self-determination. Legal equality among them. Non-intervention, no interference with the internal affairs of other states. These are the two principles that are at the basis of the sovereign state coming from the Peace of Westphalia. Sovereign states act as independent agents that can raise taxes, money, within their borders, contract debts as legal entities, because of course the main source of finance at the time was borrowing money from the banks in Florence or similar. So basically they were highly subsidized by the nascent financial power. And of course, dispute borders. So defend their border, often violently, of course. So here there is the roots of the concept of citizenship as holder of rights. The concept of citizenship has an interesting history. In the ancient Greece, there was not a juridical concept of citizenship. There was a biological concept of citizenship, depending on the ethnical positioning of everybody. Just with the Roman Empire, you introduce the concept of citizenship. Why? Because the empire of Rome was so wide, they couldn't manage it by their own forces. So they had before outsource and then embed foreign fighters in population. And therefore, in order to fight for me, I'm asking something in exchange, and what's it? Citizenship. So the legal recognition of the Roman citizenship. Cives Romanus sum. And in this way, we have this evolution of the concept of citizenship from biology to juridical state. The history of the passport is even interesting because the passport was invented by Henry V in the 1500th century. And the passport was really used not to leave the country. It was like an elastic band to go back to the country, to be entitled and allowed to re-enter the country. An elastic band that was connecting you to your original country. And we are going to see that this is very relevant. We are talking about the digitalization of the passport. The issue of the sticking and unsticking identity. Montesquieu suggested a classic separation of the state political powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. The state, as a multi-agent system, organizes itself as a network of these three powers. So, substantially, you have a state. The national state is characterized by the fact that progressively there is a building of mutual control between the different powers. Of course, this evolution after the apoptosis of the national states results more in one of the powers, the executive in general, taking over the other ones. The example that you see are many. You see countries where more and more government is trying to control both the legislative and the judicial power. That's a sign, of course, of the crisis of the traditional national state, and of this evolution and mutation towards something different. The state, starting from Westphalia, arises as the information agent, which legislates on, tries to control the technological means involved in the information life cycle: education, census, taxes, police records, written laws, press, and intelligence. You understand that all the apparatus of the sovereign state, or the national state, are tied to the ICTs, are based on, are dependent on ICTs. You cannot have education without ICTs. You cannot have a census without the capability of collecting and processing information. Taxes is the same. Police records, of course, you have to do them through ICTs. Written laws, press, intelligence, of course. So basically there is this tight entanglement between the ICTs and the evolving and maturing national and then sovereign states. The state fosters the development of ICT as means to exercise and maintain legal force, political power, and social control. Through the centuries, the state, let's say, before the 19th century, was characterized by being the ultimate guarantor of laissez-faire society. So at the end of the day, I would say, in today's terms, a liberal society where the state was guaranteeing the fact that everybody, all the economic forces, were competing on the basis of the mutual power. And without any social protection. It's Bismarck established in Prussia, established the first welfare system, taking full care of its citizens. What does it mean? Establishing a pension system, for example. Established the first welfare system in Europe. And the welfare, of course, requires leveraging on the ICTs. But in the long run, ICTs contribute to transforming the state into an information society. And this is happening more and more, of course, passing from history to hyperhistory, which makes other information agents even more powerful possible. Which are these information agents? These information agents, the first one, were born out the Bretton Woods Conference. Bretton Woods Conference is 1944. All the leaders of the Western countries before the end of the war got together in order to regulate the international financial order after the Second World War, building three major organizations that were international organizations They were not statewal entities. They were what we call now multi-agent systems. Cioè under this statual organization that are in charge of functions that are important, of course, but need to be managed at the above the level of the single countries. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, now the World Bank, in order to manage all the process of reconstruction of the world that was destroyed by the Second World War. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that's now the World Trade Organization, that this time is a bit on crisis after the issue of the tariffs. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, in order to manage all the monetary issues at the international level. So you see that these three first multi-agent systems start taking over and relieving the national states of the important issues related to the international financial management. And so we can say the ICTs help shift the balance from a centralized government to a form of distributed governance and international coordination. This we call by apoptosis of the post-welfarian world. John Williamson coined the expression Washington Consensus in 1989, became a significant aspect of this and our hyper-historical age. And what is it? This refers to a set of 10 recommendations representing the standard strategy of stabilization to be applied by institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the US Treasury Department when dealing with countries coping with economic crisis. Let's make an example. Some of you may remember the crisis in Greece. Crisis in Greece was extremely serious because the state made substantially was bankrupt because of a number of mismanagement at the end of the day of the financial politics. So, considering that the destabilization of the Greek financial system was very dangerous for the rest of Europe, a troika made up of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund took over, entered Greece, and they took over all the power of the government substantially. And they made choices that were extremely tough. So choices, cost-cutting, heavy cost-cutting, that means cutting pensions, cutting salaries, firing people, and they exaggerated a little bit, and they recognized it after. This is the first experience of application of the Williamson or the Washington Consensus. And I don't know if we learned, but certainly this external stabilization, so violent, so tough, is something, of course, that you need to deal with very cautiously in similar cases. In any case, this is the Washington Consensus. So today we know that global problems, environment, financial crisis, social justice, intolerant fundamentalism cannot rely on sovereign states as the only sources of solution. Consider the environmental problem. Environmental problem, of course, is a problem of pollution all over the world generated by the fact that the developing countries want to have the same right to pollute the rest of the world that we took in the last few centuries. Is this unfair? Well, this is what we deserved, of course, for our politics versus the developing countries. But on the other hand, this is dramatic for the whole humanity, because it risks to poison the whole humanity. How can you manage this kind of problem? Not certainly at the statual level, not certainly at the individual statual level. You need to manage it to the intervention of a multi-agent system. The problem is that, unfortunately, the multi-agent system that you in place in order to deal with the environmental problem are extremely weak. are heavily influenced, for example, by the oil producers, states. They certainly have not the same interest that we have, and that we try to face with green policies. So substantially, there are multi-agent systems that have different level of capability of intervention on the specific problems. Financial crisis. Financial crisis, I showed an example that on the opposite was extremely effective, even too much. Social justice. Social justice is something that very difficult to manage, but intolerant fundamentalism, ISIS is a major multi-agent system because it is a terroristic organization that's spreading around. Hamas will become probably already is. That's an organization that can certainly spread from one country to multi-country to international scenarios. And in order to deal with them, of course, you cannot deal with them at the pure statual level. And so, in fact, as a matter of fact, they involve and require a global approach and intervention by non-government multi-agent systems. Consider what happened with the new generation Europe. When Europe came out of COVID, a major program was launched in order to restart Europe. And to start, the intention was to start it focusing on the new generations, investment to favor the development of the new generation. Actually, it became something different. The Piano Nazionale di Ripresa e Resilienza in Italy is something very different, for example. But certainly, we could never recover from the economic crisis after COVID without 200 billion euros injection from the European Union. These problems needs to be managed at a multi-country level. Now, so the shift from a historical post-Westphalian order to a post-Bretton Woods hyper-historical predicament may be the beginning of the sovereign state, the beginning of the apoptosis of the sovereign states with Bretton Woods, and that even the entering the hyper-historical phase may be explained by many factors. I will quote 4, where ICT plays major role. First, power. ICT democratize data and the processing control power over them, multiplying the power centers. You understand that the ICTs multiply the centers of power, therefore representing an objective fragmentation of the central state, of the centralized configuration of the power within the state. That's very easy, You see how many communities are establishing, not just at the institutional level, but associations, even multi-country, international associations that are spreading around. And I don't know, something like emergency, humanitarian organizations. They are extremely relevant, of course. ONGs, extremely relevant entities that, of course, represent a fragmentation of power because they're taking over a number of initiatives and activities formerly monopolized by the central state. So ICTs can create, enable, and empower a number of non-state agents, such as single associations and groups, multinational, international organizations, and institutions. So the democratization brought about by ICTs is generating a new tension between informational power and physical force. It's clear that informational power that's controlled by countries that are working, for example, on human rights. Countries, certainly they are leveraging, of course, on ICTs, but organizations supporting the human rights are very often in conflict with the monopoly of force controlled by national states, particularly those that are less democratic. Second, after power, geography. How ICTs are influencing the apoptosis of the traditional national state. Because ICTs deterritorialize human experience. They've made regional borders porous, or in some cases irrelevant, and they have created regions where their own life experience prevails, and which are intrinsically stateless. L'example is TikTok. TikTok is a major international multi-agent system. Why? Because it's spread all over the world. As you know, is heavily controlled by the Chinese party. And, of course, the US government is very pissed off about this. And so all the effort of Trump in order to take over the property, or in any case condition the property of TikTok, is aimed, why? Because, of course, the Chinese are using TikTok in order to learn the trends and the culture and the values of the youth that they believe that will be their enemy in the next war between the US and China. That's exactly the strategic concept that the Chinese government has. And so for them, this is a multi-agent system that is extremely useful as a tool in order to prepare for war. And on the other hand, youth and yourself, many of you, like it a lot. And so it's even more dangerous from this standpoint, and from the strategic standpoint. You can enjoy it, of course, but please think at the meaning of this multi-agent system, and that it becomes the object of a conflict between a national state, the US, and an international network that is typically intangible, like TikTok. New tension between global non-territorial geopolitics and state. Organization. ICTs fluidify the topology of politics, generating new tension between the state and a variety of non-state multi-agent organizations. The example here is the terrorism, already made it. So ISIS, as multi-agent system, organizing terrorism against single national states. And the final one is democracy. ICT certainly spurs forms of direct democracy as complementary options for forms of representative democracy. But the direct democracy is very often turned into a mass media-led democracy in the ICT sense of new social media. And in such digital democracies, Instagram, distributed groups, temporary and timely aggregated around shared interests, become sources of influence external to the state. For instance, from environment movement to economic lobbies. So, other multi-agent systems have the data and the power to erode the modern state's political cloud. For example, the role of social media in spurring localism, populism, and separatism. Think about the importance. In a global world, the global world, say from 2010 and 2020, because now the trend is different, as we're going to see. In a global world, ICTs have been essential in spurring, for example, the revolt in Catalonia against the central power. Scotland, you know, the Scottish people would like to stay within the European Union, while, of course, after the Brexit, they are not allowed to. Eastern countries, you see this flourishing of fragmentation, political fragmentation inside the Eastern European states, all enabled, of course, by the development of ICTs that are sustaining historical differences. So, and that's the end of the first part. I believe that we are all curious to move to the second one. That's going to involve you more directly into the concept of interfaces. And considering that I would like to save 15 minutes because I want to share with you a video of Jan Bremer. Jan Bremer is one of the leading, if you are going to be able to make it working. Otherwise, I'm going to give you the link. I'm going to give you the link in any case. Jan Bremer is a leading opinion maker that's consulting with all the major governments in the world about the impact of AI on national states, in particular on democracy. And I have organized the interview with him, and I'd like to share it with you because I believe that you can get a lot of new spurs that you can, sparks that you can take advantage of. So I will proceed without a break if you agree. Would you prefer to have a break? Or anybody has a strong preference for a break? Doesn't look like? Okay, so I'm continuing. So far I've explained things. Now I'm going to ask you to give me some feedback. In any case, to focus on a couple of concepts that are essential because otherwise we don't move on. Lecture 2, we talked about the role of technological interfaces and of the concept of in-betweenness with technologies lying between a user and the prompter. Today, we are going to talk not about technological interfaces, but about human interfaces. For this, I need to be sure that all of you have well in mind what we are talking when we are talking about first order, second order, third order technology, and the role of interfaces inside. So I'm not asking if. If not, it's going to be tougher for you to follow. And so I hope that you've been diligent so far, but I trust that if you are here, you are certainly very diligent. Now, today, it makes sense to describe ourselves as informs. You remember that informs are informational organisms. In order to understand why and how we can interact and develop or suffer and do harm to one another based on the information flows in which we are involved. Now, considering that we are informs and we have defined ourselves as informs. Informs why? Because, as you remember, we have been demoted before by the center of the universe by the Copernican revolution. Then we have been demoted by the center of the animal world by Darwin. Then we have been demoted by the center of the conscience by Freud. And finally, we have been demoted by the center of the intelligence by Turing. And so at this point, there is not much that remains. We are within an ecosystem that's made up of human beings, biological entities, and artifacts that they are capable, that are sharing this function of intelligence. Now, infox, therefore. However, you must be careful to accept not an ontological and absolute position, but an epistemological and relational one. So what does it mean? What kind of infox are we? And here, we have to remember something. I definitely suggest you to write this, to read this book. That's the blue and the green. There is an edition in English by Floridi. I have shown even the pages because this is one of the key points of the evolution of the elaboration of Floridi. The shift from things to relations. And we are talking about from Aristotelian and Newtonian paradigms to the relational your philosophy. Don't be scared. What's your philosophy? By your philosophy, I mean the structure of thinking which underpin our ideas. So a part of the epistemology that we have defined, no? The consistency through which we validate our knowledge of the reality. And here, your philosophy, we refer to the structure of thinking which underpins our ideas. Aristotle and Newton share a paradigm of the knowledge according to which the most important thing are the things that seem at the basis of the ontology. Ontology is the knowledge of being as being, intimate essence of being. Last century's philosophy is always evolving the concept from the thing to the relation between the things, and consider the essential factor the relation between the things instead of the things per se. This is the key concept. So this means from the Aristotelian and Newtonian paradigms to the relational philosophy, the shift from things to relations. So let's explore the possibility that it is not things, but relations, which make up all things and which exist between them that can play a foundational role in the 21st century thinking. So let's see what the hell does it mean. Where do I want to arrive? Therefore, we have not only infox. Considering ourselves as infox is a useful approach to interpret our human concept of today as relational nodes in an information society and to try to improve it. So let's consider ourselves not anymore like the owner of the universe and all the other things, but as nodes in an information society of relations and try to improve it. Nodes between what? I come immediately to the conclusion, consider moving from an ontological to a relational concept. We are not anymore at the center of the universe, but we are interfaces, we have considered interfaces between interacting user and the prompter. And we'll see what this means in a moment. Describing ourselves as infox, who feed on information in order to produce, process, and share other information, in an environment of data, artificial agents, and computational processes, means adopting an ecological perspective. Not in a sense that, to say that environmental. It's a lot more. Considering the human being as part of an ecosystem as an interface between an interacting user and the prompter. So consider that instead the interface is not a technology between an interacting user and the prompter, but ourselves are an interface, and know the relations between an interacting user and the prompter. And who the hell are the interacting user and the prompter? We'll see it in a moment. When the latter is interpreted in social, economic, and political terms, we can perceive ourselves not only as infox, but as a specific kind of infox, the interfaces, not in the ontological sense, but in the relational one. Describing ourselves as interfaces enable us to better understand crucial phenomena that characterize our digital era, among which the transformation of politics into marketing. And we are coming to the topic of today, the marketization of politics. So the issue is, I could ask you, do you believe that the poor level of politics of today depends on the fact that politics has adopted the techniques of marketing, or by the fact that politics has become a subset of marketing? This is not, how to say, a marginal question. And the answer is this one. We are increasingly becoming, through the development of ICTs and the pervasive role of ICTs, so substantially the hyperhistory, the center where that's fully dependent on information, spaces of interactions between agents, human, artificial, or hybrid, that want something from us and something we have, and which this agent desire. So I'm moving to this miserable design that I put together for you. And here we finally can understand what it means to be interfaces. So consider yourself like an interface between an agent and your own resources. The prompter are resources. The agent is the interacting user. So, the objective of this interaction is to enable, on the one hand, the effective and efficient functioning and control on resources. So, the objective of the interactions is to achieve control of our resources by the agent. And on the other hand, the necessary feedback that help the agents to optimize the functioning control process. Who are these agents? The social, your bank, the politics. The transformation of people into interfaces, remember that we are here, occurs in many contexts, among which three are crucial. For the world of social media, the agent in this case is the social media. We have interfaces between them and our personal data. So substantially, what does Instagram want from us? What are our data? Our pictures, our comments. And for the world of trade, say for the bank is here. Or the e-commerce, Amazon. We have interfaces between them and our money, or our credit. What do they want from us? Our money. Very simple. And we have an interface. For the world of politics, we have interfaces between politics, the political world, whatever they are, and our attention, consent, and vote. So, substantially, the pervasiveness of ICTs, the diffusion of the digital, favors the transformation of ourselves in living ATMs, producing data, money, and consent and votes. That's a little bit the concept that, of course, you can see it even in another way, because we are very ecocentric. We are convinced, of course, that we are in control of everything still, despite the fact that we have been removed by the center of the universe, by the center of the animal world, by the center of the cosmos, by the center of the conscience, by the center of the psyche, by the center of the intelligence. We forget regularly this thing, and we are arrogant beings that believe that in any case we are in control. And therefore we believe that we are not here, but we are here. We are considering ourselves agents. And we say, and we are agents that we are using, of course, TikTok to have services. Or we are agents that are using the bank in order to provide us financial services. We are agents that are getting from the politics, that are using the politics, the political parties, in order to get decisions that are in our favor. Okay, we can feed all the illusions that we want, but frankly, it's a very unbalanced situation. So, did you follow me so far? If you did, if we didn't, we can come back to, of course, to this thing. But go home, review the whole materials of the lecture, and it will be clear to you, because I understand there is some difficulty, of course, in this kind of Copernican revolution of the mind that I am proposing to you. Consider ourselves as human interfaces instead than powerful controllers of the rest of the world. Now, therefore, okay, that's what I was saying. We like to consider ourselves as agents. Nevertheless, although this is not done for evil purposes, transforming people into interfaces is not particularly nice. Feeling like kind of human ATMs doesn't enable us to feel well, I believe. No. It's very ethically questionable. And particularly because this is a contradiction. You remember the Kant's categorical imperative. One should act in a way as to treat humanity, both in their own person and in that of others, always as an end and never as a means. So it's the less Kantian thing that you can conceive this concept of human interfaces, this concept of mercantilization of politics, for example, referring to the political phenomenon. Manipulating someone by transforming them into an interface with the aim of obtaining something else substantially risk being a form of dehumanization. Consider, for example, that Professor Ferraris, in his last book that I suggest you to read, is exactly starting from this point. So he says, why should we give all our data free? Why should we it's clear that, of course, if the biggest oligopolies are making a lot of money, this means that the value of the data that they're getting from us is higher than the value of the services that are giving us. So from this standpoint, he says, they should pay for this, but not pay each of us an amount of money, because this is a very difficult kind of transactions to work out. He's saying they should pay our communities in order to finance the welfare of our communities. So that's an interesting thesis. Ferraris is a very smart guy. Yeah? I suggest you to read this thing, because, of course, this is at the foundation of a political concept in order to overcome this not particularly nice situation that I've described so far. Now, in order to improve things, one cannot ignore the need to act by respecting the principle of human dignity. You remember that at the end of the fact that all the set of the emotions that we've been talking about last time, there is one thing where the human being remains unique. And this thing is the human dignity. What is the foundation of the human dignity? Is the capability of moral behavior. Because this is something that distinguishes the human being from all the other biological and biological entities and artifacts with whom we are sharing the info world inside the infosphere. Now, and therefore this concept is very important in order to protect, defend our humanity. There is not much left, you understand, after the destruction of all the arrogant theories that have characterized the last 500 years. Now, so what is marketing? Definition of marketing in this term is the control and management of human interfaces. Very simple. Simple, straightforward. Marketing is the control and management of human interfaces. Of the interfaces between where humans are acting as interface between a system of agents and their own resources. Its goal is to identify more effective methods to use human interfaces in a way as to obtain in politics attention, consent, and vote. And the digital revolution has made possible the upgrading of marketing to politics. Yes, thanks to why? Because today politics can leverage on myriads of personal data, connected people, sophisticated algorithms, and network effects, the dominant competition in social interactions. It is the sphere of marketing that has expanded, thanks to all what comes after big data, and now with AI, to include the political sphere, which has never moved. So, the conclusion is that the marketization of politics has led to political messages which are like passwords, short and easy to remember. So substantially, the answer to the former question is the very low level of politics today depends on the fact that politics has adopted the techniques of marketing? No, depends on the fact that market has expanded while politics remained the same. Therefore, politics became a subset of marketing. That is the art of managing the human interfaces in order to reach an objective. This is very interesting. What are the implications for politics? The post-truth politics is non-alectic. This is typical Floridi language. It means simply, non-alectic means that the politics of post-truth has nothing to do with the truth. La politica dell'era della post-verità non ha nulla a che fare con la verità. Political messages either work or don't work. It is a question of interactive success, not of factual accuracy. From this standpoint, probably Baricco is, I wouldn't say if he's right, but he's right at the end of the day. Politicians use messages in order to, the good ones, in order to reach a specific objective, very focused objective. They frankly couldn't care less about the fact that this is true. Quick truth is a truth that has been redesigned to be aerodynamic, you remember, in order to reach the surface of the world. That is, in order to be easily understood and catch people's attention. So, Remember the age of the political manifesto. Even sometime today you read political manifestos. No illusion. Nobody reads them. As if they read them, they are not changing ideas in a significant mass of people. Identical for everyone and issue to an entire population of potential votes is an obsolete approach. In terms of population, segmentation, and design of messages that are aimed not just to bubbles, but to single individuals. There are enough materials and enough data in order to understand the single profiling of everybody, and therefore in condition to address the political preferences on the basis of the configuration of your own set of ideas. It's clear. So you understand that from this standpoint, the concept of quick truth of Bavitko is very suitable to the politics of today, the politics as a subset of marketing. You can believe that I'm cynical. I hate this situation, but I have to recognize it. That's why I believe that's my duty to share it with you. At least we should be aware of this thing. So I'm not encouraging you to be this kind of politicians if you are aiming at becoming politicians. I'm inviting you to be Kantian politicians and telling you that your life is going to be extremely difficult. But it's a personal choice that I would highly respect. Now, on the opposite, if you want to be marketing guys, be realistic. This is how things are working. Therefore, if the condition of politics is to be improved, the marketization of politics is to be improved too, by relying on the interfacing process itself. Floridi, this is, in my opinion, the weakest part of the thinking of Floridi, but it certainly grasped the opportunity of improving, acting on the interfacing process. So he says we can improve things acting on the interfacing process. So we have to improve the infosphere in which we live, as well as the socio-political marketing process occurring in it, because the best forces can improve only in a healthier environment. For this reason, it is necessary to counter the negative impacts of two effects which are the root of a replacement of good politics by bad politics. The first one is the Matthew effect. What is the Matthew effect? In sociology, you should have studied it. Matthew effect. God, but what the hell did you study? Matthew effect. Come on, guys. How many of you believe that has to deal with Matteo Renzi? Don't raise your hand. It has nothing to do with it. And the network effect, you know it, because Professor Cabellini explained it very clearly, so you must know it. But certainly the Matthew effect is something pretty dramatic. In sociology, Matthew effect indicates any process for which, in certain situations, the new available resources are distributed among the participants in direct proportion to what they already have. So, the principle on the basis of which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And the network effect is very similar, if you remember it. The network effect in economics indicates the phenomenon for which the value of a product or service increases progressively based on the progressive growth in the number of other users, and vice versa. So, the combined effect of these two effects, the more one loses, the more they continue losing. The fewer people participate in a network, the less useful it becomes. These are two effects that, of course, is important to invert. Both of them can be inverted, but how can this inversion be triggered? So, how do you address the problem of addressing the inequalities, the growing inequalities inside the society? Because certainly the digital has the impact, has the effect of an inequality accelerator. It has even the opportunity of acting, generating some effects of social cohesion. But the effect of accelerating inequalities is more powerful. So the combined effect, if you don't manage it, is becoming an increase of the inequalities in the society overall. So the issue is, in order to fight these two effects, you have to act on the democracy, and we are talking this as structuring of power. And we are talking about the different forms of democracy here. And we start from Stuart Mill. Representative democracy is a compromise due to practical constraints, whereas real democracy will be the direct one. So, 150 years ago, yes, no, probably less. No, correct. Stuart Mill was a very smart guy. Stuart Mill was saying real democracy will be the direct one. But certainly he had no idea about the tools in order to make this possible. I say representative democracy is a compromise due to practical constraints. It's clear that in the situation of direct democracy, you have the conditions in order to invert the Matthew effect and the network effect. Because the power of the single individuals would count. While, of course, in a society that's based more and more on social inequalities, the situation is unbalanced. Things can just get worse. So basically, in these terms, direct democracy theoretically would enable to fight against, to contrast the trend to the growing inequality that's brought in by the digital. It is true that digital, through platform, etc., is able to restrict a direct democracy, which actually has never existed in the past, that guarantees a disintermediated, constant, and universal political participation of all citizens. Theoretically, it's true. But the issue is, here we need to address the relationship between sovereignty and governance. We have already been talking about this. So you should be familiar with these things. But I will remind you what we mean. So, sovereignty is the political power that can be legitimately delegated. Governance is the political power that can be legitimately exercised temporarily and at the same time legitimately withdrawn. And for this, we move. Politics could be saved by the shift from representative democracy to direct democracy, which the web will make possible. So theoretically, we would have this chance, of course, of recombining sovereignty and governance that today is split. Or is split because, you remember, we have already quoted the first article of the Italian Republic that say, Italy is a democratic republic founded on labor. Sovereignty belongs to the people and is exercised by the people in the forms and within the limits of the constitutions. That means that people owns the sovereignty, but does not exercise it directly, but through his own representatives. That is the government that's elected by the parliament, that is elected by the government that's elected, that expressed by the majority of the parliament, that elected by the sovereign people. So that's basically the substantial difference, the conceptual. When we are talking about democracy and structuring of power, that's where we stand today. So actually, the structural separation between who holds and legitimates the political power, the popular sovereignty, and who legitimately exercises it, the representatives, is an essential property of democracy, and not an obstacle which has to be overcome with political representation. But as a matter of fact, its absence is a typical feature of autocracies. So the risk is that an ideal situation where you recombine sovereignty and exercise of the sovereignty and governance is even a situation where you get Millet, or you get Orban. That means you risk heavily to lose what I was referring to in the first part of this lecture, the separation of power. And when you get one of the powers taking over the other two and controlling them, this is sad. So this is the problem of this theoretical ideal model that's direct democracy, that at the end of the day, when you don't get the indirect democracy, but the effects of direct democracy through the fact that there is such a huge majority that is expressing a government that takes over both, even exercises directly the sovereignty, well, you have problems, big problems, dictatorship. So at the end of the day, representative democracy is not the least worst political system, but is the most flexible, though it is not the most efficient. That's the conclusion that we are getting to today. And democracy is first a question of structuring of power, only secondly a question of semantics or syntax of power. It's structure of power. Democratic regime is not only a way of exercising power, but first of all a way of structuring it. Those who hold the power do not exercise it, whereas those who exercise it do not hold it. Provided that you have separation and autonomy of the three powers. The merger between the two parts leads to weak forms of dictatorship or control of the multitude, the tyranny of the majority. How to invert the matrix effect and the network effect, enabling good politics. This is the weakest part of the thinking of Floridi. However, it's my duty to share it with you in any case. Few ideas for the democratic replacement of bad politics by good politics. It says the issue is how to overcome the bacterial resistance to democracy of the Italian democracy. So the problem of populism. Bridging the gap between politics and civil society by turning anger and disgust and bad politics into strength and passion in promoting a better society. Guys, with 50% of the Italian population that doesn't vote, you understand we are very far from here. On the opposite, the problem is that this kind of politics, as a subset of marketing, is disgusting more and more people. And so, if you are unable to revert the situation is going to get worse. And this is why, in my opinion, these are, by Floridi, very, unlikely hope. And the key concept they say, that, from my opinion, is that today democracy lacks the oxygen of a human project for the 21st century. For this reason, the therapy must start from the shared design of common human project worthy of our commitment. So he says, at the end of the day, what you are missing is a major project that's meeting the characteristics, the features of the ecosystem that he has built through his thought. Of course, this is very weak. And the only message that I could give at the end of this thing is always remember the issue of what is left to us that are not at the center of the world is the sense of our human dignity and of the capability of moral behavior. And this is what I encourage you to keep always in mind with your professional path in the future. With this, I will share with you the last 15 minutes of this video by Jan Brenner. There's not an optimist. This was recorded a few days before the last US elections. And so all what he says, he didn't know who would win. Put yourself in his shoes. So what he's saying is our predictions, and you compare them with what's happening. And before this, I'm going to go back to this. This is the bibliography that you're going to take into account. So I encourage you to study the Fourth Revolution, chapter 8, the green and the blue chapters 11, 15, 17, 18, if you are able to get hold of it, and to review this book. And the suggested take-home projects are two. One is the marketization of politics, case study and experiences compared. And the second one is the impact of AI on geopolitics, from globalization back to regionalization. What perspectives for Europe and Italy? So how AI is affecting geopolitics. That's why I'm showing you this video from Jan Brenner. So if you're interested, of course, you can start from this in order to build your own take-home project.
Jan, first of all, thank you for your joining the Digital Italy Summit, even if you can't be with us in real time due to your commitments, I think, in this moment in the West Coast of the United States. In the last 2 years, you spoke frequently of becoming a technopolar world dominated by two tech superpowers, United States and China, but above all by a few powerful tech groups. How did the evolution of AI from initial enthusiasm for ChatGPT and new powerful LLMs to autonomous agents for specific tasks will impact on economic prospects? And do you see a reshaping of global balance of power due to this evolution?
I do. I think that
io ce l'ho sul PC, ma voi non ce l'avete. Qualcuno di voi che può aiutarmi a vedere se ce la facciamo a farvi vedere il testo? Dai, qualche ingegnere c'è, insomma, ragazzi, via. Su. Vieni. Riusciamo a portarlo di là? Eccolo lì.
Adesso però si vede tutto lo schermo, cioè quello che lei vede
bene.
Quello che lei vede su questo schermo si vede anche.
Benissimo. Perfetto.
Dove l'avete aperto qui?
Vai. Grazie.
AI is one of the two most important technological transformations happening in the world today. The other is the move to post-carbon energy. And they're both going to affect every sector of the global economy in every country. They're going to attract ultimately trillions of dollars of productivity enhancement and growth. So, I mean, these are absolutely unprecedented developments in the history of the global economy, and the countries and the companies that are leading will be much more powerful. And so, for example, a few things that means to me. The first is that the United States is going to be able to use artificial intelligence to create strategic relations with countries that they haven't had as much influence with going forward. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, these are countries that are, of course, sending a lot more oil and making a lot more hard currency to countries like China. But their national security orientation with AI technology will be completely a bet made on the United States. And I suspect not just with the Gulf, but also partners that we'll see around the world, like in India, Indonesia, Kenya, many Latin American countries, that the willingness to tie up on AI to American corporations will create a military industrial technological complex that will align those countries in that area more with the West. But at the same time, the Chinese are dominant in nuclear, wind, solar, electric vehicles, battery technology, and the same countries will be doing that business with China, not with the United States. So at the same time as the US will have much more influence through AI, and that's going to matter strategically, I also think there will be guardrails that prevent a Cold War, and that other countries around the world will be hedging effectively with China on transition energy, with the Americans on AI. And that means that you don't get to create a new block system, which I think is very important and very positive for geopolitical stability long term. If the Americans had an advantage in everything, or if the Chinese had an advantage in everything, it would feel much more like a Thucydides trap. That is not where we're heading, in my view.
I see. It's very interesting what you say, because usually we are used to hear just to speak about a cold techno war between US and China and decoupling, while you are giving more room to other scenarios like the possibility of having new swing states that are not the swing states
Yes.
of American elections, but India, Israel, South Korea. You didn't mention Europe. Do you think that Europe could regain a role, maybe thanks to the need of models in European languages in the large language model system? And I think into, for instance, to Mistral in France. Do you see any possibility for Europe and Italy?
Well, because AI is a tool that affects every sector, and that you see use cases for every corporation, then, I mean, clearly where the EU is going to have an advantage will be in deploying AI in areas where the Europeans are already strong. So, I mean, you could see this in terms of luxury brands and using AI to create a more powerful luxury brand experience for consumers all over the world that the Europeans will continue to dominate. Absolutely. I can see that, connecting AI with high touch human managers that make people feel immersed in the brands that they find most aspirational, and giving people that otherwise don't have that access the ability to touch it. I mean, that's one small example, but I hope you see my point, which is that on the one hand, the dominant platforms and the dominant companies, which are going to require enormous amounts of data and compute and energy and water, these will be dominated by a small number of American corporations, in my view. And that, of course, advantages the US. And I think that Europe will have a harder time. You've seen the decoupling of growth between the US and Europe over the past couple of decades. And GDP per capita in Europe is nowhere close to the United States right now. And that is due to a lack of industrial productivity, a lack of entrepreneurship, a lack of venture capital. And I think with AI, the Europeans will slip further behind. But AI is an area of incredible productivity gains that can be used by everybody in their areas of expertise. So I don't think that the Europeans will compete effectively against the Microsofts and the Googles, but I think that they will be able to make their existing sectors of strength far, far stronger and more unique. But I also say that set against the context where the Russia war, to get to my sort of area of background with the geopolitics, this isn't going to get better. The Russians will still be seen as a rogue state that are engaged in an asymmetric war against not just Ukraine, but the Europeans as well. And that is also a major drag for Europe. I mean, the fact that you're housing these millions of refugees, the fact that there are far more coming from the Middle East, from Africa, the fact that energy and input costs in Europe are a lot higher than they are in the US, and that's structural. The fact that the Europeans have to spend a lot more money on defense and on the maintenance and support of Ukraine. I mean, all of these things are drags on European growth. So if I think not only with my AI hat on geopolitically, but also with a political science lens on just where conflict is heading in the world, this is all a problem for Europe, of course. It really is.
Speaking of your expertise in geopolitics and political science, we used to think that central planned economies of autocratic systems are less efficient of free markets of the open societies. Is a reversal possible, in your opinion, with AI-empowered central planned systems?
I think we don't know, but it's an open question in a way that it hasn't been for the last 50 years. When I look at state-planned economies and hybrid state capitalist societies, places where the state captures the private sector with privately owned national champions and state-owned enterprises along a spectrum, what you see is a lot of corruption, not great information sharing, a lot of inefficiency, and a lot of prioritization of things more important to the government than growth. And clearly, while there are lots of problems that come from the excesses of a capitalist system and lots of people that are left behind if you don't have an effective regulatory environment, certainly a well-regulated capitalist system has proven to be far, far better for growth and productivity and ultimately geopolitical strength as a consequence than one run by the state. Now, in large part, that's because of the frailties of human beings, their short-termism, their narcissism, their limited worldview, their emotions, their passions, all of that. Now, when I think about the ability of AI to comprehend real-time data, and I'm not talking about large language models here. I'm talking about large quantitative models, models that are running on discrete, accurate data sets. So they're not hallucinating. I'm talking about the industrial uses that are teaching us. They're inventing new battery technology, and they're inventing new vaccines and new drugs and new genetic manipulations. When I think about deploying AI at scale to help run a business, to help run an economy, it is plausible that not only will those companies be successful, but they could become the only successful companies in 10 or 20 years' time. And what that would mean would be suddenly the advantages of scale would overwhelm the challenges of corruption and lack of human-directed productivity. In other words, it's quite plausible in such an environment, in an AI-driven environment, a couple of generations down the road, and this is happening very, very quickly, that monopoly platforms will become the most efficient economic and even political systems. So what I'm suggesting, Massimo, is not only is it conceivable that AI will make capitalism outmoded, and by capitalism here, I mean free, unfettered competition among large numbers of actors and creative destruction. But also it's possible, and this is more scary for me, in my view, that AI will not be compatible with democracy. And that instead, not only do you have a centrally planned economy for efficiency, but you have centrally planned AI-enabled governments, which takes power away from citizens. I think that and of course, in that environment, citizens might look very different, might act very differently than they do today, because, they'll be spending so much of their time intermediated by algorithms. Their closest friends would be an AI that would know more about them in terms of their data than any other actor in the world, any other person, including that person themselves. And that is it's very hard to imagine, but even though we can't imagine it, companies are building it, and they're building it real time, and they're not really testing it before they build it and before they roll it out. So we have to start thinking about the implications.
What you say is fascinating and also a little bit frightening, and goes much further. A question that I wanted to ask you regarding what the large groups are going to do in the next few years related to the American politics. But speaking about what will happen in the short term, we have seen with the Biden administration a revival of the antitrust policy. Now, do you think that with this wider role of large groups, technological groups, that could be a reversal of this policy? I'm asking this because you're just speaking about long-term possibility of monopolies, and we have Peter Thiel, for instance, who is a great fan of so-called creative monopolies, and Elon Musk, who wants to fight against the combative Lina Khan out of the Federal Trade Commission that has been very important for antitrust policies in the last few years. Do you see?
Well, hopefully,
a change of this policy.
We're having this conversation. We don't know who's going to win the U.S. election. Hopefully, by the time this conversation is airing, people will know. And obviously, that will have an impact on the direction of antitrust. But irrespective of whether it's Harris or Trump, the reality is that these leaders in the private sector, in the technology companies, are moving a lot faster than the governments are. They are the ones creating the models, creating the algorithms driven by the business plans. And AI has a lot more capital. It is fundamentally driving the U.S. economy. I mean, the U.S. markets are flat if it wasn't for the companies that are involved in the sector. And the strategic orientation of U.S. policymakers is that you have to keep supporting them because otherwise the Chinese are going to win. So, I mean, you've got a whole bunch of technologists that truly feel that there should be no regulation at all interfering by the American government in this space. They are becoming much more powerful, much richer, and they have much more influence over U.S. politics. Keep in mind that when we talk about the Chinese system as a state capitalist system where the state captures the corporations, the U.S. is not the opposite of that. The U.S. is not a well-regulated system where the government is independent. The U.S. is the system in the world where the corporations most capture the government. The regulatory environment, the politicians, through their lobbying dollars, through their ability to place former politicians in jobs in their corporations, all of these things. So the U.S. system is not only leading in AI, but is also by far the most vulnerable to having the people driving these businesses who are right now largely acting as sovereign in the AI space. They're the ones that are clearly most susceptible to a technopolar environment, ideologically, practically, and also in terms of the speed and money and power of AI and the actors that drive them. So for all of those reasons, I tend to not think that the Lena Khans of the world are going to determine a lot in terms of outcomes of these questions.
Yeah, and my last question is not a question, is a sentence. Tom Friedman recently wrote, "We are building a godlike technology without any agreement on the Ten Commandments." What do you think about that?
I don't think it's godlike at all. I'm very far from that. I think that this is a technology that is being deployed by human beings. But it is more powerful than any other technology we've ever created. In other words, it is a technology that will allow human beings to become godlike. And we're already seeing that. And I worry that if you allow humans all over the world to become godlike without oversight, without regulations, without the Ten Commandments, as Tom said, then you're going to end up in a much more dangerous place. So again, I'm a huge believer in this technology, but I'm a huge believer of it in the hands of responsible people. And as we have known historically, many of the people that deploy technologies are not responsible. They're not accountable. They're not people that we would entrust our children with. This is a serious problem. And it's one of the reasons why we need not just governance inside the United States, but we need global governance on AI. Increasingly, these will be global challenges, and our nation state systems by themselves will be inadequate to handle them.
Jan, thank you very much for your contribution. Talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Good.
Bene. Di un anno fa, ma come vedete questo qui sa quello che dice. Molte di queste cose si stanno verificando. E a questo punto, niente, il messaggio finale mi sembra un messaggio importante. Non distruggete mai l'etica, è quello che ho tentato di darvi nel corso della lezione, mai l'etica dalla tecnologia, perché se no finiamo male, ragazzi. Va bene, con questo per oggi abbiamo concluso. Rivedete tutta questa parte prima di lunedì, perché lunedì affronteremo on Monday we will discuss the impact of ICTs on growth, employment, and social inequalities. So look forward to meeting you on Monday. Thank you very much.